Hi guys, we are here. We're just waiting for Grandad to get set up. So just give us 1 minute and we'll come to you with our lovely show regarding VE Day 75-year anniversary. We'll be back.
Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Good afternoon and welcome to Anthony Baker's YouTube channel. I've never done this for my own private self before, so hope you're all well and you're all logging in to listen to Dad's stories. If the children are there, we want you to come and say hi in the comments. Give us a little thumbs up and let us know you're there. I want to know if the McKeowns are here, so if you come in and say hi, that would be lovely. I want to know if the Kellys are here from Dundonald. Come in and say hi. I'd also like to know if the Bakers from Troon are there. The Nevilles from Troon, of course. The McClardys in Dundonald. And we know that the Bakers in Dundonald are watching downstairs. We all hope you are safe and keeping well. We may have random people looking on the channel. We don't know. This is not private. This is going out to the public. So, yes, welcome to something we're trying, Dad. We're trying something a bit new. How are you, Dad?
I'm fine, thanks, Tone. You?
Yes, good, thank you. We're having problems with making sure Michelle gets on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send Michelle the link.
Yeah.
Just click link and you will be on. Come on. Don't need to sign on. And we're just waiting, everyone, for Michelle. We know everyone's here. So we're just waiting for Michelle.
Do you want it in? Do you want him with the link? No.
Okay, so Michelle seems to be there. So yes, we have. I'm going to do a little kind of intro, if that's okay for everyone. Sorry, I was caught off guard there ever so slightly. So World War II, which was also abbreviated as WW2 for everyone, obviously was the Second World War. It was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. The vast majority of the world's countries, including all the great powers, eventually formed two opposing military alliances. One was the Allies, and that was against the Axis. A state of total war emerged, and it directly involved more than 100 million people worldwide. Don't know if you knew that, but 100 million people. You've got to think of that number. That's a huge amount of people. The major participants through their entire economic, industrial, and scientific expertise behind the war effort. And if you think about it's kind of come at a time when we're obviously dealing with this not so nice disease that we know as the coronavirus. So there's similarities, but it's not the same, of course. But what we do is we have lots of stories that Grandad can potentially tell you also about. Britain never seen anything like this at the time. The stiffer upper lip that held the nation together through some of the grimmest times during the previous 6 years evaporated into scenes of pure, unbridled joy. The long grinding war in Europe was over. Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, had finally come, and the soldiers that landed in Normandy in 1944 or in Italy in 1943 had pressed ahead to defeat Hitler's forces would soon be coming home. The country, which had seen many of its home and factories diminished by the Nazi German bombing could start to rebuild. It also meant wartime restrictions that would be most strenuous. The UK population would be forced to live under until obviously the coronavirus, which is currently now, would soon be ending. It was not the end of the war, but it was still a time for nothing other than rapturous celebrations. Dad, VA Day, explain to the lads what you know, and well, obviously you know a lot about it. Let us
Do you
know
want me to
your
talk
thought.
about VE Day is at the end of it? Did you want me to say anything about the beginning of who participated?
Yeah, just a little bit
from my family.
so the kids,
VE Day
so the kids can get it.
Right, guys. The VE Day was really just a celebration of victory in Europe, whereby the European forces under the Allied banner defeated the Germans finally. It didn't finish. It wasn't a complete ending of the war. It was just in Europe. So VE, victory in Europe, is finishing the war in Europe, with Germany surrendering to the Allied forces. General Eisenhower, an American general that was in charge of the Allied forces, took the surrender. And then Winston Churchill, as they played today at 3 o'clock, gave the announcement on the TV. So it's victory in Europe, but not victory in the world, because Japan then had to be defeated as well.
So, Dad, then a question maybe the kids might want to see is, why do we celebrate it?
We celebrate it because, well, we've got democracy here. I mean, if you think about how we are here, we can say what we want, we can do what we want, even though we're under restrictions now with the virus. I know that, but that was hard fought for by all the people, all the women and men that fought in the war to keep us with that kind of democracy. If we hadn't have won that war, we could have been under a state that was actually a barbaric state, i.e. Germany under Hitler. And there's no way that was going to happen to the British people. They did not want that. So really, when I think about that, you had the British people fighting on their own for a long, long time before the Russians came in, and then the Americans came in. So then we defeated them once and for all. And that gave us democracy, and that was a victory in Europe.
Yeah, of course. And for any of the children that are watching, we celebrate VA Day, and the key word here is the end of the European war, but the war did continue a bit longer.
Yes, it did. It went over then in Japan. So is that what you want me to about Japan?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, the Japanese side of it was difficult. So a lot of the soldiers who couldn't come back and immediately to celebrate VE Day were then, and one of them was your great uncle, my uncle, Uncle Jim, they were sent then to Hong Kong. And what happened in Hong Kong, they had to go there and repatriate. That means taking all of the Japanese prisoners of war back to the docks and back to from Japan, from Hong Kong. Now, the Japanese were defeated with the atomic bomb, which the Americans dropped. It was just a dramatic event, and it was just the most horriblest thing that you could have imagined for the people that were on the receiving end. But they then capitulated. We then had to go over and get a lot of the troops out of China, which was Hong Kong. So Uncle Jim went to Hong Kong with the Royal Marines and escorted a lot of the Japanese prisoners down to the docks, because if they hadn't have done that, they would have been killed on the way down. They committed so many atrocities to the Chinese people, women and men, while their stay was there, that they were hated all the time. So
after VA Day, Uncle Jim didn't come home, did he?
No, he sailed out with the Marines to the Far East.
So, Dad, can you just explain to any of the kids that are watching, I know they will know, but Uncle Jim, just explain who Uncle Jim is to make sure that they all know who he is.
Well, Uncle Jim is my uncle, obviously, and he's had 2 brothers. So there were 3 brothers, and all of them, the first 2, Sonny and George, joined the army, and they both were out in France. One of them, the elder brother, Sonny Butler, he himself was awarded. He was a sergeant major, and he was awarded the OBE. And the OBE was when our troops were forced off the beaches and back by the boats at Dunkirk, and he helped organize a lot of the troops and saved a lot of lives, getting them back into the boats and back over. Yeah. George, his brother, was serving there as well, But Uncle Jim was a completely different kettle of fish. He was a bit of a lonesome type guy, like a loner guy, and
Yeah.
he didn't want to just go into the army. He wanted the best of the best. So he decided at 17 to join the Royal Marines. He then had to train to the extent that you sometimes watch when you watch the SAS program on TV. He did all of his training in Scotland at 17. He passed out the course without any problems at all, although it was very, very tough, i.e. the current schedule that you see with running in and out of the water with logs, carrying stuff and stuff like that. So he passed out. He got his Green Beret, but then he had to go down back to Plymouth, Devon, where the Marine headquarters were, before he got shipped out then over to Belgium.
Okay, interesting. Dad, just to bring it back to a little bit of kind of reasonably lighthearted, there's a story you were telling myself and Ho this morning about the famous singer Vera Lynn. So I'll bring up an image of Vera Lynn just now for anyone who wants to know. So the song we played at the start was We'll Meet Again. Dad, what was famous about that song? And tell us your story about it.
Well, "We'll Meet Again" was obviously was the battle cry really for all the soldiers. Vera Lynn was a wonderful artist in her day, and she decided to support the troops and went as many times as she could, in some cases to the front line. I mean, if you think of Colonel Tom, who was Captain Tom just recently, he spoke so well of Vera Lynn when she flew to Burma, when Colonel Tom went to Burma to fight after victory in Europe. So she was a wonderful person. She also came from East Ham, and she lived not that far from where I lived. And she used to go to a dressmaker who lived just across the road from where I did. So my mum went to the same dressmaker. So they got very friendly.
The same dressmakers as Vera Lynn.
Yeah. My mum
Wow.
had the same. My mum used to love clothing, and she used to get her dresses all made by this woman who was a fantastic tailoress. And Vera Lynn was the same. She used to get her dresses made the same place. So very often Vera Lynn would be in my street across the road, and my mum would go over and chat. It got to the extent that then Vera Lynn, when she was starring in one of her shows after the war, because she was massively popular both in the States, in America, and here, she got a show. And she was headlining it in the London Palladium. So she invited my mum and me, because my dad was at sea, to go to the show. And when we got to the show, she not only had the tickets, afterwards, both mum and I got the privilege of going into her private dressing room, and we had chats and that with her in there. She was just absolutely a fantastic, lovely person altogether.
Wow, excellent.
So that was the story there.
Okay, well,
and that's Vera Lynn, who you're seeing on the TV this morning at 100 years of age, singing and with Catherine Jenkins on top of the charts. So that's Vera Lynn. She was an absolutely lovely person. I can't tell you what she was like to me when I went in. She was really nice. And
so what was it like when you met her? Because obviously she was like the most one of the most famous names at the time. Gave everyone a bit of hope.
Yeah, well, do you know what? She was down on earth. She came from East London, and she was always was down to earth. My mum always found her that way. Never, I mean, when they used to meet up, my mum met up mainly with her at the dressmakers, because they both went over there and met up over there, and we'll have tea and this and that and the next thing. But when I met her, I was in awe of it, because I was quite, thinking, oh my God, we're going to meet this person, and I was only young, and maybe I was about 10. Maybe less than that, but I can remember it vividly, because when we were ushered into the back of the London Palladium, then right into her dressing room, walked into the dressing room, and she couldn't be any nicer than she was. She had biscuits, she had anything you wanted there in her dressing room, because she knew that we were coming. But my mum was totally comfortable with it, because she knew her. So I'm not so sure. Hello?
Hello, we're here. Get your video camera back, Dad. Can you hear us? Dad, we can hear you.
Yeah. I don't know how to get this back.
Your camera.
All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. Right. Am I on? Am I back on?
Yep.
Somebody keeps coming with notifications. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's notifications there. Don't worry, I've got that sorted.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so that was really it, Tony. It was a wonderful experience for me. And to see her this morning on the TV and last night on one of the news programs was brilliant, you know. And
So-
considering her age and what she did.
Dad, we actually have a guest coming in here who would like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So it's actually Ed McClarty. Kelly, you need to unmute your video. There you go. So Ed, do you have a little question you want for Grandad? It's actually Ed McClarty. Kelly, you need to unmute your. And you need to turn the volume down on YouTube, Kelly channel. Do you have a little question you want for Grandad?
Question for Grandad. What would you like to ask Grandad?
What type of soldiers got badges?
What type of
What?
soldiers got badges?
Well, they were very brave people, Ed, that
I'll
got
bring
the
you out,
badges.
Kelly.
Badges.
Hold on, I'll mute you. There you go. On you go. On you go, Grandad.
Right, Ed, the type of soldier that received medals, which is you're calling badges, were very brave guys. They went out of their way to help other people in their battalion, help other soldiers around them. They were just brave guys, did acts of bravery, and that's why they got awarded medals.
So, Dad,
However,
we've actually brought up some medals on the screen. Can you talk us through
Yeah.
these? I think these are actually Uncle Jim's, aren't they?
Yeah, they're a band of basic medals that he got, but I think I can, if you can highlight the France and Germany merit one. That's not on there. They were all basic badges. That's because all soldiers received badges for serving in the war. That's this one here now is Uncle Jim's personal commandos, and it's got United We Conquer, and that's his own. And that's what he wore as a commando. He didn't wear it at war, obviously, but that's what he wore when he was outside of operations, and it's United We Conquer.
Right.
And there was an African and a French and a German one that I sent.
Hold
you
on, not
there.
that one. No, I won't
No,
bring
that's
that one.
not that one. Not that one. No, that's it. Yeah, I think that's the one. One of those now is the French and German Merit Award, because Jim served in Belgium, France, and Germany, and he got awarded that. Both of those medals commemorated that.
Excellent.
So that's
Let me
it.
just see. Ed, was that a good answer? Were you happy with that?
Thank you, Grandad.
Thank you, Grandad.
Okay,
You're welcome,
thank you,
Ed.
Ed. If anyone else wants to ask a question, we'll bring you in. So yeah, that was good. Then I think they're all kind of really keen to see things like about the medals. I think there was another question came in from Ollie there.
Yeah.
He would like to know about the Purple Heart and the rations.
Right. Okay. Well, shall I answer him now? Ollie, you there?
He's not actually on the video. Stacey, if you've got an option, click on WhatsApp. I've actually sent you the link to join in the into the video. But Dad, you can carry on until Stacey does it.
Okay. Well, the Purple Heart was one of the highest awards that you could have got in the American Army, and American forces, not just the Army, all the forces of America. As Anthony's showing you the picture now, this Purple Heart was awarded to my mum's first husband. She was married before my dad, but she married a Polish American fighter pilot. He decided to join before America did. He came over to Britain and he went into the RAF as a fighter pilot, because the RAF were needing fighter pilots. They had a lot coming from Poland, but he came from America and joined in. He flew the Spitfire. He was a gunner. He was actually at the rear of the plane, and he didn't fly it, but he was at the rear of the plane, which was a really exposed area to be, firing his gun out of the rear against other aircraft that were around. He was shot down quite early in the war, and my mum had hardly really had a married life with him, so he was killed fairly quickly. But he did fly quite a few sorties, and he was awarded the Purple Heart for his work that he did in there, and that's his Purple Heart that Anthony's shown you, which was passed down to me by my mum.
There's not very many people. Not very many people still have a hold of the Purple Heart, do they?
No. Well, there are quite a few Purple Heart holders, yeah. And it's quite an award to get, and a lot of people did get the Purple Heart for outstanding service. But he was different because he did join before the Americans joined. He volunteered, in other words, to come over and fight the Germans because he was of Polish extract. Bearing in mind, guys, that Britain went to war with Germany because Poland was invaded by Germany. Germany decided to take over Poland, and they were ruthless in what they achieved. So a lot of the Polish people have, and still have today, believe it or not, a lot of animosity towards the Germans. And at that time, a lot of the Poles decided to fight and join up with the British forces or go underground to fight their own war against them. Our own Pope, John Paul II, he was active in the Second World War of looking after a lot of people that he could, a lot of Jewish people that he knew were going to go to be executed. But Uncle Jim, my mum's first husband, all his family were Polish, although he emigrated and lived in the States.
Was it Illinois? James is asking, was it in Illinois?
Chicago,
Illinois, yeah.
Chicago.
Ollie, we can't see you. Ollie, how did you find that on the Purple Heart? Did you like that?
Yeah.
Have you got any other questions you want to ask Grandad?
The rations.
The rations.
Oh, the rations, that's
He
right.
wants to know about
Do you know what?
rations.
You know, Ollie, we can go, like Mum can go to the supermarket. She just goes out in the morning. She can go to the Morrisons. She can go to Asda and everywhere like that. Walk around the shop and buy as much as you want. We could not do that. The sort of restrictions that we have now with the virus, which is more restrictions on where you can go and how long you can go out for, doesn't apply to food. You can still get plenty of food. But when I came out after the war, there were a tremendous amount of restrictions. So we used to have a ration book. And this ration book was very tiny little squares, you know, of very tiny squares like that. And you had to tear a little square out. So when I was maybe your age, my mum would say, would you go and get me some butter and some sugar and some bread? So I would have to take a little coupon, one coupon for each of those items. And I went into the local shop. It was never a supermarket, small shop, which had lovely food in it. And I would say, can I have a piece of butter, please? So they would cut butter off of a big slab of butter. It didn't come in packets. It didn't come in boxes. And then they would then say, what else do you want? So I'd say, can I have some bread, please? And as I would order it, they would take the ration little pieces of paper away. And that meant that you could get what you asked for. But that's all you could get. You couldn't get any more. There was no such thing as going in and buying 3 packets of bread or 3 packets of this or that or the next thing. It was
Ollie, can you
item
see
of
that
ration.
picture of the ration book that Grandad's talking about? It's actually on the screen just now.
Can't really.
Go inside. Hold on, he needs to go inside. Hold on.
So everyone, you can see the ration book there that Grandad's talking about, and you can see how we're very fortunate in the current circumstances that we're allowed to go into the supermarkets, even under restrictions that we've got. But the restrictions they had back in the World War II didn't really allow them to just have as much free movement as what we have. So Grandad was talking about the little slips you can see there in the images where people had to go and take the slips off if they were buying certain bits of, like a slab of butter, Dad, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Cheese, butter, anything like that. Some things we just couldn't get. You know, it was very difficult to get fresh fruit and things like that. Very difficult. Got some fruit, but it was difficult to get a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Ollie, how was that answer for you? Do you like that answer?
Yeah.
What did you think about the Purple Heart? The Purple Heart's amazing, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Would you like to see it?
Do you want me to show you the Purple Heart again, everyone? I'll show you this. This is like, you can tell people that you could actually, when this is all over, go around to Grandad's and actually physically touch it.
Wait, you have it?
Grandad has
I
that.
think Ollie, Anthony, there was a bit of crackling because we were outside, so Ollie missed the bit about who got the Purple Heart. I don't think he fully understands who actually got the Purple Heart.
So Grandad, can you just confirm who got the Purple Heart?
Yep, just to confirm that the Purple Heart was the husband of my mum. My mum married a Polish fighter an American-Polish aircraft fighter, and he fought in the war. Unfortunately, he died very quickly. He was shot down. He was a gunner on the back of the plane, and he would just hold the gun at the back of the plane. The pilot then would get into a position where he could then fire on other aircraft that were flying, German aircraft that were flying in the sky. He did a lot of what they call sorties. That means flying over Germany and then in bombing Germany, and or in his case fighting the German planes that were coming over to attack Britain. However, he has to say he was killed pretty early on in the fight. He was killed, and the American state awarded him a Purple Heart.
Granddad.
One of the highest awards you can get. Yes, darling.
Granddad,
Yeah,
do you actually have it?
Yes.
I do. Next time you come round, I'll let you touch it and see it.
So, Grandad,
Thank you.
Ho was asking. This is one of the Polish fighter planes.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's one of the planes that he would have actually flew in. And
Yeah.
Ho-Ho's
he flew in
actually asking, how did you actually pronounce his first name?
It's very difficult. I think Ho-Ho's got the better name than me. If you put up the rear of the Purple Heart, the back side of the Purple Heart, and you can, that's it. So it's I think it's
Tadeusz
Schwartz. Yeah. My
Yeah.
mum on the marriage certificate has the back part of that. She was known as Amelia Violet Schwartz, something like that. It's a difficult name to pronounce, Polish name.
So does everyone understand though that Grandad's mum used to be married before Grandad's mum met Grandad's dad, and the pilot was a fighter pilot in the World War II, and that's where the Purple Heart.
Gunner. He was a gunner. A gunner.
So Ollie, thank you very much for coming on. We're going to bring in Liv now into the show. Just carry on watching on YouTube. Okay, look at that. It's a lovely picture.
Thanks.
Wonderful.
Ideal if you've done it on landscape, Stacey. But anyway, it's fine.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. Much better.
That's it.
So before I bring Michelle in, Michelle, could you turn your phone on landscape and I'll bring you in, okay? Bye, Ollie. Oh, the phone must be locked, Michelle. It's fine if it's not turning. That's fine. Just put it back to normal. That's okay.
Yeah.
Who's
Hello,
this?
guys.
Who have we got on here?
Elle.
Hi, Elle.
Hi. Why were children issued with Mickey Mouse gas masks?
What, darling?
Can you be louder, Elle, please?
Clear. Why were children issued with Mickey Mouse gas masks?
And you know, you even surprised me on that one. I didn't realise that, to be honest. So, El, you can answer that one. Where did you look that up?
See, it was a fact that came through,
It was a fact that came through.
and it was still.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mickey Mouse stands for Junior.
It was told
So
to
you
wear
could-
the mask.
Sorry?
It was so Mum said it was.
actually.
Elle, speak.
What? I can't
Louder,
You
Elle.
must say.
Louder.
hear him. Mum said it was because they wouldn't wear the mask. So if it was Mickey Mouse, and they'd wear it.
Ah.
Yeah. Also, the fact you got to remember another thing as well, El. The smaller the person, they couldn't. It was too big to put on an adult mask onto them, so they would have the smaller mask, and then that would be an enticement. You know, oh, do you want to wear a Mickey Mouse mask? It was purely the size. If they went into, they could not fit an adult mask on them, so they had to have a smaller mask. That was really the reason. The Mickey Mouse was just an enticement. In other words, you know, when you come around to me and you want some chocolate, and I get you to do something, that's an enticement, right? So they used to put the Mickey Mouse mask on.
See,
Yeah.
now see, now Liv's got a question.
Right now, I've just got a question.
How many times did the royal family appear on the
Balcony.
balcony of
Buckingham
Buck-
House.
Buckingham
They appeared,
Buckingham
they
House
appeared.
on VED? On V.
Do you want me to say
On
it?
They came out, and then they came out
On
again. They came out a few
VED.
times. Yep, they came out a few times because the crowd was so elated that they came out and went back in and then came back out again. So they were totally adored and wanted to be there and see everybody and as much as they possibly could. And the crowd was so excited. It was unbelievable.
That's
I
a
wasn't
picture.
there,
That's
obviously.
actually a picture of Winston Churchill. So for
Yeah.
anyone that doesn't know, Winston Churchill was actually Great Britain's Prime Minister at the time, who came out to announce on VE Day that obviously the war in Europe had ended. And you can see all the little dots in the background. That's all the people coming out to celebrate. Can you see that, everyone?
Thanks, Granddad.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Grandad.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So, Grandad, thanks, lads. So, what? Hold on a minute. I think we've got more comments.
Hang on. Yeah.
Oh, here's a good question coming in from Ed.
Did you want to know a little bit more about Uncle Jim's?
Yes.
adventure
Yeah. Let us
in the
know a
war?
bit
That's
about
an
Uncle Jim.
interesting-
Dad, you've got some guidance for us. So you just give us a couple of little cheeky stories. I've got pictures I can add up.
Right. Well, I
Oh,
wanted
Dad,
to
sorry.
just
Before
give
you do it, Dad, we've actually got another question coming in from Ho-Ho. So we'll bring Ho-Ho onto the camera, okay?
Yeah.
Hello, Ho-Ho. Can't hear you, Ho-Ho.
Hi, Jim Bob.
No, you're muted. No, unfortunately, we can't hear you, James. I'll kick you, James. Do it one more time. Right, Dad, carry on with Uncle Jim.
Yeah, I think it's quite good if you know. I mean, this is a person that's related to you, so it's quite nice to know his story at 17. I told you a bit about his brothers, but his mother did not want him to join the special forces. She did not want. She was scared, so she wrote to my Uncle Sonny, the eldest brother, and told him to appeal to his officers in charge to get Jim to go to him so he would look after him during the war.
Wow.
However, Uncle Jim totally refused to do that. He was an extreme guy, Jim, in as much as someone like Lindsay and Mark and Scott Brown, things like that. That was Uncle Jim. I mean, he was extreme. I mean, the training he did included mountaineering, included skiing. He did all of that at 17 years of age.
For anyone that's watching, Granddad's explaining to you the special forces is like the next level of fitness. The fitness levels that Uncle Jim must have been through the roof, Dad.
Yeah, they were through the roof. Yeah, his fitness levels
And
were
the skill set he had.
The reason he was so fit was that my granddad, his dad, used to run a boxing ring. So all the brothers used to run a boxing in the gym, and all the brothers had fought in that boxing gym. So they were always extremely fit. My granddad had them trained them up to be very fit, something like you and James did when you worked down at the Ayrshire Warriors. So they were extremely fit guys. So when they went in, he found the training hard. He told me it was hard, but he managed it. And he must have been bloody good because, I mean, sorry about swearing. He must have been good because he then went and passed in Scotland in unbelievable conditions, and then came down from Scotland and finished his final parade in Devon, and then got his Greenberry and then went off after that.
Wow.
But he was extreme. Now, what I wanted to say to you, and an aside thing for that, Uncle Jim was a great singer, and his first port of call was Antwerp in Belgium. That's where he went. Now, guys, I've left a couple of maps, his Uncle Jim's maps there of when he of his actual duties, his actual in service, what he had to do when he went into a certain area, and the maps I left with Anthony there. So he went to Antwerp in Belgium, and he was based in Belgium, and for a while before they moved across the Rhine into Germany.
That's the map
When he
up
was
there, right?
when he was in Antwerp, they used to have relaxation in the evening and one thing and another, even though the war was on. And he used to sing with a band there in Antwerp. He always told me that, and he used to sing with quite a big band as such. A band would have all brass band, mainly that, a bit like an old-fashioned group at that time called Glenn Miller. So they had trombones, they had saxophones, clarinets, and he would sing a type of Frank Sinatra type songs and things like that. He was an entertainer. From Antwerp, he then went and they used small barges, and they then went across the Rhine. And a funny story to that was when I went to see a trade show with Uncle Jim in Germany, we went on the Rhine. And as we were going on the boat, he just stood up and shouted, this is where we came when we defeated the Germans. I couldn't believe he was doing it. And this was when he was when we were going to a trade show. They went from there into Germany and then fought inside the behind the lines. That's where Jim went to fight, and he experienced quite a lot in terms of fighting, in terms of hand-to-hand fighting. 2 stories there. One a difficult one. The other one, they had a big guy in there in his troop, a very big guy, and they had to retreat at one point. They were making a retreat. It was just sometimes they were getting overwhelmed with the German troops, so they had to make a retreat. However, when they were hiding on the retreat, there were a lot of German tanks were coming down, but there was one particular, they decided that they were going to take this tank out. So this big guy, must have been like a Schwarzenegger type guy, picked up a bazooka. I remember him saying it. Just stood out in the main strip, which was like a dirt track because it was through the forests, and just blew the armored vehicle away. Just blew it up with a bazooka. That was one of Uncle Jim's big guys. Uncle
Jim's literally standing right beside it, watching it.
So watching.
Can you imagine? Could you imagine actually standing there watching that?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But what he also then had to do then, though, that wasn't over because the German troops scattered. And once they scattered, the British, like Jim's mob, had dug themselves into a trench. So they were actually in a trench.
Wow.
And they were preparing for this. So they dug a trench. What happened then was the Germans were fearless. Uncle Jim had a lot of admiration for the ordinary German soldier. They weren't all a product of a horrible barbaric state as the Nazi state was. He had a lot of respect for them. They just didn't care. They came straight at, and there was hand-to-hand fighting in the trenches. And unfortunately, next to Uncle Jim was his best friend, who was then killed by a German soldier who got in the trench and killed him. Now, I didn't go in to ask Uncle Jim what his situation is, that because I didn't think he was that forthcoming in it. But you can imagine him in a trench, Germans diving in, and they were hand-to-hand fighting. The only thing I can say is testament to that, Uncle Jim had and retrieved at least 5 or 6 German Nazi daggers.
Wow.
And he had them in his possession. So that might say a little bit more than the X-rated type of the story. That's a PG guide that I gave you now. The X-rated side of it, you can read it through yourself, read into it yourself.
Oh, Ed, Ed's wanting to know a question on that. What's the youngest age a person could sign up to fight in the war back then?
It was 16 generally, but a lot of people went. There was one hell of a lot of guys just didn't notice of that. You had some guys wanted to try and join up at 15. They were all wanting to fight, and they would go in and then tell the people in the recruiting office that they were 16. There weren't the amount of records there to check them all the time.
Yeah.
So some got through at a very young age to fight. But they
so
were all.
Kind of, Uncle Jim was he was hand-to-hand combat, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't.
No,
Jim was in all aspects of the Marines. Yes, he was trained in hand-to-hand combat, trained for that. But it wasn't like you've got today, with all big guns firing here, there, and everywhere. And it was like close-up rifles, close-up fighting, stuff like that. Taking a hill, taking something like a strategic part of the land where the Germans held the upper part of the land. They had to fight to get that, and that's where they lost a lot of colleagues. I mean, Uncle Jim came back from the war and lost so many of his colleagues in the war. Not many of the Royal Marine commandos got back alive. He was
Which is
one that
why
did.
which is why it's so special when it finishes, that we always every year, for all the kids that are watching, every year we have to remember all the time what these people did for us to be able to give us what we can do. But just very briefly, a little story about Uncle Jim. Even when I was growing up as a kid, Uncle Jim used to get into trouble from his wife, Aunt Eileen, because Uncle Jim used to say to me, I can take you down and put you on the floor within 1 second. Doesn't matter the size of you, I can put you down. And I was like, can you? And even though I was a small little boy, I was a big boy, but I was not as big as Uncle Jim. And he used to always do these little maneuvers on my hand. And James and Stacey Kelly, everyone, Michelle Dawn, everyone could probably remember it. But he used to grab my thumb and then try and pull it into my wrist. And then I would fall to the floor, and Aunt Eileen would always give him into trouble. And then he would get my hands and put them behind my back, and then he'd raise them up really high. And then he would be like, right, you do this. And I'd be like, oh, okay, Uncle Jim. And Aunt Eileen would always slap him across the ear and say, stop doing that, Jim. Stop doing it, Jim.
Yeah.
But he was just trying to show everyone that he could, if he really wanted to, even at the age he was at that time, take anyone down.
He was very extreme. He was extreme. Nothing. He was fearless, extreme.
Yeah.
But then the training that he had in Scotland made him hard to the elements. The elements never worried Jim. Water, rowing, mountaineering, skiing. He did all of that, and he came from a situation, believe it or not, where his mum he was kind of getting spoilt by his mum, but he didn't like that. He wanted to come out of that. He didn't want to be spoilt by his mum. He wanted to get out and fight and make sure that join the forces and see what he could. As I say, so he went the extreme way and joined the commandos.
We have a few questions coming in. So I've seen yours, Jay, but yours is kind of close to the end. So I'll bring your one in, Jay, in a minute. But Kelly's bringing a good question in here. Do Germany celebrate VE Day?
Germany didn't celebrate VE Day, no, because I mean they were the
Obviously
the defeated nation. Yeah, Germany was a sorry state after the war. There was a couple of incidents. I remember one coming back to Uncle Jim again. There was a situation that they found themselves in when they were patrolling. The Germans, I think I've mentioned this story to you before. The Germans were patrolling a particular part of the area, and they would go out on night patrols. Uncle Jim and his mob were also patrolling a similar area. So we're not talking about much ground between the front line. Wasn't a lot of ground. And that particular night, Uncle Jim told me that they were doing their patrol and walking along, and then opposite on the other side of the bank of the river, the Germans were walking the other way, doing their patrol on the other side of the river, and they just acknowledged each other and carried on doing the patrol. Now that was an unusual one, very unusual. But the truth of the story is that in the end, the no celebration of VE Day for the Germans. They were really exhausted at the end of the war. That a lot of the basic German soldiers had fought hard. They had too many fronts to fight. So what they were doing in some instances, they knew, for example, if the Russians were coming across from the east, they would surrender immediately to the Allied forces, i.e. American and Germany, American and British, because they couldn't stand it, because they knew that if they were going to be imprisoned by the Russians, they'd have no chance of surviving the concentration camps that they'd have been put in.
Stacey's actually got a good question here.
Uncle Jim at one point told me that they were in a situation whereby they were confronted, and the Germans were so tired and so bedraggled that they just put up the white flag as such and just walked all out towards them. And they took prisoners maybe 10 times the amount of what their patrol was. So if he had 50 people in his group, that 50 people took 500 German soldiers.
Yeah.
I mean, it just took them because the Germans couldn't last. That's why they weren't celebrating any victory.
Stacey's follow-up question to that is, I mean, you might not know the answer, but maybe you do. But in Germany right now, do the schools get taught about the war?
Well, I think they're now doing it. They didn't after the war. It was suppressed. The history in Japan and Germany, and even in countries like even Ireland, they did not report anything much about the war. But in Germany, no, they didn't. And it was only really the younger generation, when they started to come through, the young people who decided then, look, we need to know more about this. And they insisted then that it was brought back in to the history books. So then, unfortunately for some of the young people, when they studied it then, they realized really what that state was, such a barbaric state. And
Yeah.
then, so therefore, you've got Germany now. I would say with the younger Germans now do understand exactly what's going on now and what went on. So they have their own. They do celebrate their own. I've been to Germany. I've been and seen a lot of the places where they celebrate the memorial the same as we do. So they do celebrate the dead in Germany as well, but more of a more difficult celebration, if you know what I mean, where we were celebrating the victory and whatever. They just had a bad loss led by an absolute tyrant of a leader, dictator, Hitler.
Well, we've only got 2 more questions, Dad, because we've been on for 3/4 of an hour. We probably could go on all night,
Right.
of course, with the war, but everyone
Yeah.
has also dinners and everything to get as well at the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
time. So 2 final questions coming from Kelly and then Jay. So Kelly's asking, what were some of the women's jobs when men were at war?
Well, my mum, for example, the women were brilliant during the war. I mean, also, and that's why I think like Queen Elizabeth, she was only a young girl, and she was there as she was in the army, and she was an engineer. She was a mechanic. She could do anything. And she was an inspiration to a lot of other young people at the time. My mum worked in an ammunition factory because obviously the men were away and they needed ammunition, they needed bullets, they needed everything like that. So she worked in an ammunition factory producing obviously the bullets and stuff like that and whatever needed. Very similar to a plant that we're up in Stevenson, where a lot of people worked up there when they made explosives and things like that. So my mum was very much involved in that. And that was a very dangerous job. Even in today's terms, when I first came to Scotland and knew some of the accidents that happened in the ammunitions and place up in Stevenson, my mum worked in it when there was, when there was no really health and safety issues. She also then went from the armaments factory to work on the buses. So my mum then worked on public transport, and she was a conductress on the buses. She worked on that during the war as well. So she had 2 jobs there, one in the armaments factory and one on the buses. So that's what the women did. They took over as many jobs as they could.
Wow.
One very, maybe a point that could illustrate also the war was when Auntie Eileen, which a lot of you know about Auntie Eileen, when she was in the countryside, she lived in the country, she went to get milk in a churn and thought it was all clear to do so, but there was a German aircraft and decided that a couple of the German aircraft went AWOL. If you know what, they decided to leave the pack, and this plane was coming down and it was strafing, that means pumping bullets out of machine guns from the plane down onto the ground to try and get anybody. It didn't matter who it was. It could be cars on the road. It could be not many cars, but motorbikes or people, whatever like that. And Auntie Eileen actually had a churn of milk. A German plane came down, went low, and started to fire at her. She dropped the churn of milk and went to the ground. The plane then crashed. But when Auntie Eileen went back to the house, she got into trouble because the churn of milk was spilled, which she didn't bring the milk back. However, the village then all went out to where that plane was crashed and went over to where they didn't do anything to the pilot or anything. He was dead, but he never got out. But that's just a
whereabouts
side
did
of the story.
Auntie Eileen live at the time?
Pardon?
Whereabouts at the time did Auntie
Eileen was living out in Essex,
Right.
in the countryside in Essex. That's where they lived. So did Uncle Jim. They lived out there. They didn't live in London. My mum lived at the docks in London that was bombed every single night. But Uncle Jim lived
Was that not called the
outside.
London Blitz, Dad?
London Blitz. Mum lived right the way through the London Blitz. Bombs, you name it, everything.
There's some images.
Every night. And the restriction. And we talk about the restrictions we have now with the virus. They had unbelievable restrictions then. You know, there was a curfew. You had to close down your windows with darken your windows every night, because the Germans would come over at night and anything with a light in it, they would just bomb.
Right.
But they lived through unbelievable restrictions. So what we've got at the moment, and we think this is tough, what we're going through with the virus, was absolutely nothing to what went on in the Blitz.
Well, of course, this is VE Day, and it's a day of celebration. So the McKeowns and Troon want to know about the celebrations once the war was won.
Well, guys, the celebrations were just London, particularly all the major cities, but mainly London, I suppose, had a multitude of different races there. They had the Americans, the Canadians, the Polish, Air Force, all of the different nationalities that formed the Allied forces. A lot of them were in London at the time. So what you had then was one of the biggest international parties that you could have imagined going on in London, in central London. That replicated right the way around the UK, Manchester, Glasgow. I mean, but there were, I mean, for example, the Scottish battalions, a lot of them were based down in London as well. Were in London, and everybody just joined in, and it was a fantastic unification of all of the people of the UK, just celebrating the fact that the Germans were defeated. It was just a brilliant time. I know my mum just had a ball, just was dancing the night away. I think I listened to a survivor of that, and they were saying, you know, there was restrictions on drink and stuff like that, but they found out where the drink was, and they had a really good time. And they had a wonderful time. So that was the victory there. An international festival of song and dance. That's what you might say the victory in Europe was.
They're putting a lot of similarities to VE Day, that potentially when the coronavirus, for all the kids that are watching, this little virus, we're going through the times where this is the hidden war that we're going through, and hopefully when they do come up with a solution to this, that we will potentially get our closest ever feeling towards VE Day when we are able to go around the world and be normal again. And they've done that comparison today quite a few times, and hopefully one day we'll be able to celebrate and have big street parties, and I think there'll be quite a few street parties, to be honest, when this is all over.
So can I just bring one other thing is, guys, I think that they would like to hear this as well, because, and again, it's a direct relative. My dad, who then would be your great granddad to the little ones, to Ollie and Ed and all them. I mean, he was in the Merchant Navy. He served in what they called the South Atlantic. And the South Atlantic is the sea that goes close to the whole of South America. In America, you've got Argentina and Brazil. And a lot of our ships were out there because a lot of the German U-boats, that's in submarine boats, were based out in the South Atlantic. And our guys would go out there trying to fuel up a lot of the British warships. So my dad's ship, for example, would be carrying supplies, ammunition, and then they would meet up with British warships and resupply them. And then there was a war going on then between the British warships and the German warships. However, just one quick story: the Graf Spee, the biggest German battleship with longevity, being able to shoot for miles, was out at that point. And I remember my dad telling me that they were getting tracked by the Graf Spee. And my dad's ship only had one small aircraft gun on it, and but it had smoke evasion on the boat. So they would send up as much black smoke as possible. And under that smoke, my dad managed with his ship, with the captain, and they got into Buenos Aires. They got into Argentina and escaped the Graf Spee. Not many merchant ships escaped the Graf Spee. The battleships that my dad was supplying with all the other merchant seamen cornered the Graf Spee into Uruguay, and they stood just outside the port. Now, the captain of the Graf Spee, the German captain, who had the most powerful machine that you could ever imagine, what he had in that boat, decided he did not want to let the boat go into custody of the British forces. So he blew the ship up. He actually scuttled his own ship. But that was something that my dad was involved in. And my dad then went on to also serve and take a lot of supplies in the Baltic area, in the Arctic campaign. So he was one of thousands of ships that left Britain with supplies for Russia. The Russian people sometimes fought the Germans with nothing, with sticks and stones, basically, until armaments reached them. Because my dad always said to me when they arrived and dropped the supplies off in to the Russians, you could see relief when stuff was being unloaded that they needed. I'm talking about tanks. I'm talking about as much stuff as you could give them, guns, the lot. So that was a very big operation that he was involved in. That's how I just wanted to say about my dad.
Isn't it mad though, guys, when you're listening to all these stories, that there's so many stories connected to Grandad regarding the World War II. It's madness, and we could have a show and go on for hours and hours and hours probably and update you all. So I mean, it's up to you guys. If you want us to come back and do something else, we can do something else a little bit shorter and do maybe a little series for you over this time. If you want any other particular things we can try and talk to you about, this could be the history lesson that the kids are crying out for over the current outbreak that we're going through. But Dad, that's us been on for an hour. I hope you have all enjoyed it.
I hope you're not got too bored with it, guys. I hope it's not too boring.
No, we've tried to make it as fun and interactive as possible. So
put your comments at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, there you go. There's one comment.
Says on the Irons United. Put your comments and any questions you want to ask. Any more information you need, we can do that. No problem.
Yeah, excellent. So thank you very much for tuning in, and happy VE Day. Stay safe. Look after yourself. He's been Jim, Dad, Grandad. I've been Anton, Uncle Anthony, Tony, whatever you want to call me. Much love. Bye-bye.
Ciao.